Hello, and welcome to today's webinar, Starting Again, Parent Connections After School Closures. My name is Amanda Rothengast, and I will be your moderator for today. Before we introduce our speaker, I would like to let you know a bit more about our webinars. Both Sanford Inspire and Sanford Harmony host these webinars where thought leaders and educators share best teaching practices and tools to support social emotional learning. These presentations are the opinions and content of our guest speakers and may not necessarily be a direct representation of Sanford Harmony or Sanford Inspire. For best viewing of this webinar, it's recommended that you shut down your other browsers. Also, if you have questions for our speaker, please feel free to use your question box on your GoToWebinar control panel. As a reminder, this webinar is being recorded, and you will receive a copy of the slide deck and recording within the next week. And if you are watching this webinar live, you will receive a copy of Certificate of Completion from GoToWebinar within 24 hours. Now, without further ado, I would like to introduce our speaker. Dr. Mary Conage serves as Special Projects Director for Pinellas County Schools, Florida. She enjoys sharing insights gleaned and practical knowledge gained over more than 30 years in education as a teacher, instructional coach, elementary mathematics supervisor, and Title I director. Building on her doctoral studies at the University of Florida, she advocates culturally responsive pedagogy as a foundational approach to addressing persistent achievement gaps. She is passionate about supporting home-to-school connections to help build the bridge to more successful partnerships and student engagement. Welcome, Dr. Conage.
Thank you, Amanda. And it is my pleasure at this time to introduce my co-facilitator for today, Kaylee Davis. Kaylee is an instructional coach here in our home district of Pinellas County Schools, Florida, where she supports teachers with classroom management, effective planning, and impactful pedagogical practices, among other things. Kaylee is truly an ambassador for the profession with her connections through teachers associations in our district, across the state, and across the nation. But mostly, Kaylee is an advocate for meaningful, authentic engagement of all families, particularly those who are traditionally marginalized or who sometimes aren't engaged in ways that we traditionally call engagement. But Kaylee and I are both very thankful to each of you for joining us during this very busy time of year. And this is an important and a very important conversation that we're going to have. So we thank you for your time. And we're going to jump right in by asking you to just step back in time with us for a little bit, back to around 5 months BC, before COVID, right? So approximately one month before COVID, this is what classrooms looked like. You may have seen circle time, where students were sitting quite close together. Look at those knees and hands touching. Oh my goodness, no masks. Sometimes students even sat eye to eye and knee to knee and did, oh my goodness, turn and talk without masks. Also before COVID, there was small group instruction where you could actually see your students' faces. You could see their smiles, showing the learning that was happening, or even if they were puzzled about something. And before COVID, students worked together on collaborative tasks, even sharing materials and supplies. It seems like such a long time ago, but right around March 13th, 2020, things changed for us in the education landscape. They changed quite quickly and they changed very dramatically. And so I have taken some time in preparing for our time together today, do some reflection on the impact of COVID-19 in my life. And so part of my reflection was to come up with what I call 7-word testimonies, right? So a 7-word testimony is just a very quick and concise way of expressing how you're feeling about something. So One of my 7-word testimonies about COVID is this: my family and I are healthy, thankful. Another of my 7-word testimonies is I won't take hugs for granted anymore. And just one more example: can't mask it, I miss my students. Now what I want to do is invite you to think about the impact of COVID-19 and before we dive into the content for today. And if you were to reflect and really get it shrunk down to just 7 words, what would be your 7-word testimony about the impact of COVID? Take a minute and think about that and type your response in the question box.
We definitely want to give that wait time because this is an important question, and getting those 7 words is so important. So go ahead and take your time, and when you have an idea, go ahead and type it in the question box. It's okay to slow down. I'm over it. I want normal back. Relationships are everything, in person or remote.
Wow.
It's been a roller coaster. I miss hugging my students.
Mm-hmm.
I'm healthy and happy but tired. I realize everything I took for granted. Interestingly, life has taken a new turn. I miss my student and my school. I miss seeing people. Worried about safety and health this time. We will return to school in one day. We grew in resilience and mutual support. It's a learning curve for all teachers. I am blessed even when COVID is going on. Being safe and responsible isn't always easy. Missing being in my class. I'm excited to support my students again. I will treasure every hug and smile.
Thanks so much, Amanda. So Kaylee and I, she's going to share our objectives, and then we'll talk about our purpose for being here together, reconnecting with those families after being separated for this period of time. Kaylee?
Good afternoon. You guys hit the nail on the head, I think, with your 7-word testimonies. I felt like you were just pulling things out of my head. We started school on Monday, and it's so hard to not hug the kids. And all of this has been very overwhelming and such a big topic. And so today, during the next hour, we're really going to focus in on these 3 points and how to move forward with those family connections. And I think we all know the importance of making relationships with our families. I think that was actually in someone's 7-word testimony. But a lot of times, especially when we feel overwhelmed, it gets pushed to the back burner. So we're going to really focus today on re-energizing about parent connections and then considering ways to be intentional in planning for the new normal with this family engagement so that it's not just happening willy-nilly, but we're really making an effort to make those connections. And finally, we're hoping that you walk away with specific actions that you can take to facilitate these authentic and ongoing family partnerships now with the new normal and moving forward.
And I would just add to that some of the things we share today are going to affirm you in your current practice. So know that you're going to hear some things that you're like, yeah, I do that. And we want that to happen. We will also share some things today that you may not have thought about before or may not have realized. And finally, I know it's both of our hopes that you'll hear one thing, at least one thing that inspires you, that you want to go back and put into practice. So we want to approach this with these 3 big ideas. How do we want to start again with families? And there are 3 ways. One is to acknowledge, the second is to ask, and the third is to act. So acknowledge means we want to restart and begin again with our parents with transparency. And that's so very important for a few reasons. One thing we want to acknowledge in starting over with our families is the shared experiences that we've just gone through. So we started today with those 7-word testimonies, and that's just one example of a way to share experiences. If you want to make a true social emotional connection with families that may have been broken while we were out of the buildings for a while. Getting to the point where we say, hey, we've had this shared experience, our shared humanity. These are things that we now know that we value, that maybe we had lost that before COVID came, right? So whether you didn't have toilet paper because you didn't have the resources, or you had the resources but it wasn't there, that was a shared experience. As crazy as that was, right? What was that all about? But that's a shared experience. Some of us had family members that we could not see. They were in hospitals or nursing homes, or perhaps they were elderly or vulnerable medically for other reasons, and we couldn't connect with them. That's something that can connect us with our families. That's not just something to happen to us, but something that maybe happened to them as well. During this time, we had some racial tensions in our country, right? We had some protests going on, and for us to act like none of that happened is not going to be fruitful if we really want to start again with transparency with our families. There's a way to acknowledge that, yes, we had things going on that may have frightened us, that may have made us angry, that may have fired us up and made us really passionate and reconnected to our purpose for even being educators. It's important to acknowledge that. Not only do we want to start again by acknowledging those shared experiences about social distancing and having to wear masks, all those things, but we want to acknowledge lessons learned during this time. This is so important. Lessons that we learned about our students, for example. We learned that a lot of them are way more resilient than we may have thought. We learned sometimes that some of our students really thrived in a virtual environment where others, that just was not their cup of tea. And we may have made assumptions before COVID about what our students would like or wouldn't like. We may have learned some things even about ourselves, about our patience or lack thereof. We might have learned that we thought we were great at being responsive and planning things ahead of time, and then COVID came and knocked us off our feet. It's okay to acknowledge that, but it's important to acknowledge even bigger issues beyond our students, beyond ourselves, larger systemic issues like inequities with technology and access for some students. It's important to acknowledge that. Not only the systemic inequities, but also to acknowledge some of the assets that rose, our ability to pull together and be creative and to respond, on the drop of a dime. Let's acknowledge those lessons and how we're going to take those and apply those in this new normal that we're going to talk about in just a minute. But in addition to acknowledging our shared experiences with families and acknowledging the lessons learned, another thing we want to acknowledge is, what is this new normal going to look like? And I know that some of you have already started school. We just started yesterday in our school district. It does not look like it did BC, right? Before COVID, with everybody just all comfy and cozy together. Social distancing, masks, virtual connections, and communicating what that's going to look like can take away fear. It can open up communication. In fact, in some ways, parents can provide insights and perhaps give us ways to do it in an efficient way. And it all starts with us acknowledging that, hey, one of the things we learned through this is that we all have something more to learn, right? We might have thought we were on top of the world and really rocking it, but this rocked us all. So step one in starting again is acknowledgement, starting with transparency. And so Kaylee is going to give some examples of ways that we might do that.
Yeah, it's always so inspiring to hear Mary talk and remind me of why this is so important. But I really think about, we've got a lot of new families on campus or new teachers to the school that are building relationships with parents and students at the same time as we're trying to acknowledge these experiences. And so having that strong relationship and building that right from the get-go is going to be so important. And so I was trying to think of, like, how do I do that with the families that I work with. And I do a lot with adding a personal touch. And so when I talk to students and they tell me that last year I had a student who was so excited because they were going home to make a special dinner with their mom for her birthday. And so I took 30 seconds at the end of the day to just write a note and say, hope you have so much fun at your birthday dinner. Happy birthday. And so the student was able to take that home and give that to his mother. And it just made that personal touch of like, I'm thinking about you, or I'm paying attention to what your student is saying. And I do the same thing with following up on topics that I talk to parents about. So if I have to call home and I'm talking to them, I had a family, they were saying, well, we're going through a lot and my aunt is in the hospital. And so a couple days later, I sent a message to them. I use text messages through Google Voice. And so I sent a text that was just like, hey, how's your aunt doing? And I know that's a little more time out of our day. I use my Outlook calendar a lot. I have to have a to-do list because I'm pretty forgetful. But so I just write it on my to-do list for a couple days out, like follow up on this topic. And that personal touch is so important because it just makes people feel cared about. And so when I am having to have a harder conversation or have a parent come in or invite them to something, I've already built that relationship with them and they know I'm not just there as an ambassador of the school, but I'm there as a person that cares about their student and them. And so secondly, I've really been doing a lot of self-reflection during quarantine. I thought I was going to have all this time for myself and I was going to read books and I was going to put my kid to bed on time, and none of that happened. And so I've really had to push myself to like check my bias and be understanding of other people. I know that my 6-year-old, almost 7-year-old, should get a certain amount of sleep at night. And I know that I should feed them a healthier dinner than mashed potatoes and mac and cheese. I know that I should be reading books with him, right? Like I have a master's degree, I'm in education. I know the right things that I should be doing, but I don't get them done. And so I have to be understanding and check my bias of what parenting looks like and what educating looks like and meet people where they are. So I can't, if I, want to be that Pinterest mom and I can't be, then why would I judge someone? Because maybe they're trying and maybe they know that's what's best and they just haven't been able to get there yet. And so finally, the golden rule, I think we've known this since we were tiny, but just treating people how you want to be treated. We've all gone through a lot, and what we've gone through may be worse or maybe better than what other families have gone through. And I was at the dentist a couple of weeks ago, and I cringed because the dental assistant, she asked me, how often are you flossing? And I paused and I was like, not very often. But what she didn't do was yell at me. She didn't cancel my future appointments forever. She didn't tell the front desk to stop scheduling the appointments. And I think of that as like, I think of parent-teacher conferences. After I leave the dentist for the first 2 weeks, I do what I'm told, but then life happens and I forget. And so each time I go to the dentist, I feel like I'm flossing more than I was before, but I'm definitely not flossing every day. And I feel like that is how it is with parents. If we tell parents, you got to read a book with your kid every night, well, they might do it for 3 or 4 nights and then they're going to get busy and it's not going to happen, but we can't give up on them. So we want to make sure that we're treating people like we want to be treated, with grace and understanding, and really building that relationship, because we're going to have to be partners this year more than ever to move forward from this COVID-19 break that we had and then this new normal for all of us.
And starting again, one of the things to consider and reflect upon and acknowledge is what kind of school were we, or what kind of classroom were we even before COVID? Were we old school or new school? So there are 4 different kinds that I want us to take a look at and examine. The first kind is called a fortress school. And by the way, these are from the work of Dr. Karen Mapp from Harvard University. If you don't know her work, it's something, if you're interested in parent engagement, meaningful parent engagement, research-based parent engagement, check out her work, Dr. Karen Mapp. But they wrote a book called Beyond the Bake Sale, and that's where these quotes are derived. But these 4 types of school, as I'm going through them, kind of think about yourself, your classroom, your school. This is a situation in a fortress school where people might say parents belong at home, not at school. If students don't do well, it's because their families don't give them enough support. We're already doing all we can. School is an oasis, and we want to keep it that way. So it's just like it's us versus them. If our school was like that before COVID, after COVID, it might look just like that again, unless we stop and really think and reflect, what are some ways that we want to lower the moat, to use a metaphor, and begin to bridge those chasms that sometimes exist between us and the families we serve. The second kind of school is called a come if we call school, a little bit better than a fortress school. In this type, parents are welcome when we ask them, but there's only so much they can offer. So I'm not saying that this is what the people in such a school would say. The most important thing they can do is help their kids at home. So again, there's this distance thing where we know where to go if we need help. So it's like a don't call us, we'll call you situation. Again, was my school like this before COVID, or my classroom like this before COVID? And if so, what changes can I make? What different choices and decisions can I take to make it be a little bit different afterwards? Because now that we've had this time to pause, it's a great time to reset. The third kind of school is an open door school, in which parents can be involved in lots of different ways. You see parents on campus all the time. They're helping, they're volunteering, they're tutoring, they're mentoring, they're driving for field trips, they're sometimes maybe even leading activities for other parents. And so in an open door school, we feel like we're rocking the house, right? It's like, yay, that's my school. I recognize that. But believe it or not, there is one better, and it's called a partnership school. And in this type of school, which is what I would encourage us to aspire to, even if we're not there quite yet, it's a goal to set in front of ourselves and say, hey, this is what I want it to be like. In a partnership school, look at that first word, all, A-double-L, not just those families that seek us out, but as Kaylee will share, as you'll hear some of her examples, these are families that we seek out. They're not always the ones that are there every time the door is open, but we seek them out because we know that they have assets, they have funds of knowledge, they have unique skills that they can contribute to making our school community stronger and moving achievement forward for all students. So in a partnership school, it's all families and communities have something great to offer, not just some. So a lot of the exclusion and the barriers and the biases that may have existed pre-COVID, because we've had this shared experience that revealed all of our common humanity, right? Now we know, hey, there's creativity, there's beauty, there's talent, there's things that can be offered from all walks of life. And so in a partnership school, we're going to leverage that. We're going to go for it and grab it and maximize it. So the first A in starting over again is to acknowledge. The second is to ask. Ask what? We want to start again with inquiry, because if COVID-19 taught us anything, it's that we didn't know it all and we don't know it all. So we want to restart with our families by asking some questions instead of making assumptions. One of the things we want to ask is, how are you doing? If this could be done through a survey or other ideas, and Kaylee will share, but really getting at what was the impact of this time on those families and on those parents? And it's okay to just ask that. Ask them, what do you want me to know? This is an important question because, again, sometimes there are treasures in families and in parents that we sometimes overlook, or we assume that they don't care, or they're not engaged, or that they don't have anything to offer. This is the time to let some of those old biases and mindsets go and make a new beginning in the way that we relate to and engage families. Ask them, what are some of the things that you want me to know about you, about your child, about your family, about your experiences with the schools? As Kaylee said, was there something that happened during the time that we were out that's going to impact your child's learning this year? So ask the questions, not making assumptions. And again, this is one we often do, but it's good to remember, ask the families, what do you need to help you help your child's learning? Ask the questions. And so Kaylee is going to share a few examples of how she has done and is doing this.
So as we build these relationships, right, because you can ask the questions, but the answers are gonna get are gonna vary based on your relationship. You're not gonna get those meaty, helpful answers that you're looking for if you haven't built that relationship or aren't actively building it. And so one of the ways that we have built relationships with families on our campus is through home visits. And we're all thinking, home visits? We can't go to homes. There's COVID-19, right? So this year, we're going to be doing home visits virtually at my school. And so we're setting up appointments with families where they can use their child's device that they're using for distance learning, or they can check out an iPad with us if they are a person that chose in like brick and mortar school, and they can bring it home. And we're doing home visits, not in the sense of like, hey, let me tell you about how I run my classroom, or your student could really do their ABCs every night and that would help them. But home visits in the sense of building relationships, and we use the model from Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. And we typically do it in pairs, and we are restricting our conversation to asking questions like what Mary was talking about. We always ask, what are your hopes and dreams for your student? We ask the students, what are your hopes and dreams? And like, how can we support you in getting there? And so we have some teachers setting them up now, and I can get back to you on how the virtual ones go, but the in-person home visits that we've done over the last 3 years have been so impactful for teachers to see parents in a different light. We have a very tough family on campus, and the mom has, I think, cussed me up and down every which way several times when they started here. And it's because she's a fierce advocate for her babies and she wants what's best for them. And so as one of her children's teacher went last year, and she called me just over the moon about thanking me for pushing her to do a home visit, and how great she was as a person, and how she could really understand when she goes off on her as a teacher, that the reason behind it. And so it really brought them closer together. Her daughter thrived last year in that teacher's classroom. And so we're looking forward to the virtual home visits this year to continue that method. But it really is a great way to build those basic relationships, so that when you do ask, how can I help? Or is there anything that you want me to know? You can get those answers that are actually going to be meaningful. And they're not like, I want you to know my favorite color is blue. We want to know how we can actually help. And so another way that we have done that is just being accessible. Sometimes that's easier said than done. When we had to shut down for COVID-19 back in March, my phone rang off the hook for, oh yes, for parent home visits, I think people are asking about what program we use. We use Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. And I don't know if Amanda, you can throw that in the chat, but they do have a website. They do have trainers, but they have a lot of materials on their website, Parent Teacher Home Visit Project. It's a great resource. But when we first started with the school shutdown and moving to distance learning, my phone literally rang probably from 7 a.m. until midnight. I was getting calls, texts, emails, messages on Teams, and I was exhausted, and I had to tell my boyfriend and my son, like, it'll be over soon, I promise. But giving that time and being responsive, a lot of parents won't ask for help because they don't want to look stupid, or they don't trust that you're going to give the right answer, or so building those relationships and being accessible. You can put boundaries on it. You don't have to turn your life over for a certain amount of time, but put boundaries on it and be accessible multiple ways. Not everyone has access to email easily. Not everybody is comfortable on the phone or calling, or maybe it's loud where they are and they don't like to answer. So come up with some different options of ways that you can be accessible. And I know a lot of teachers, I know personally a lot of teachers that put on messages like, I'll get back to you in 24 hours. In this day and age, my personal opinion is 24 hours is too long unless you have something going on, and that's an occasional thing. When parents are asking for help, we want to be there to support them, and that when we follow through with those things and we help them with a problem, then it's like the ball's in their court. And when I come to them with an issue in my classroom, it's their turn to help me, and they're going to support me and they're going to support their student, and it's like a give and take. But I have to be the first one to give, and I have to make myself accessible to them, whether it's by text. And like I said, you can use Google Voice if you're not comfortable. If your school districts have policies on that, check that out. But Dojo Messenger, whatever it is, be accessible to parents, because when they ask, it's like sometimes that's a big deal for people to even ask. And then the other last thing about the asking is the help sessions. We're making those available for parents, where a couple teachers a couple times a week put out that they're having a help session. So if you're having trouble logging into Teams, or you're having trouble downloading Canvas, or you're not really sure how Nearpod works and your son or daughter is struggling every time the teacher says go to Nearpod, they're able to help the parents through that. And they're very thankful for the snipping, and we snip things and we put it into Word documents with step-by-step directions, because we want to make sure we're reaching everybody on every level of technology. And so I also have used a lot of screencasting to make sure that I am showing them step by step, and I just screen record and then I post that link, and then I'm able to use it multiple times. So when people have the same issues, I can just send them that link. And then we also use where we'll get into a Zoom call with them, and then I can take control of their computer so I can show them exactly what to click on. And just spending that extra time with them so that they feel comfortable with the technology has made a huge impact of families that were never getting on in the spring are now getting on in the fall, or they weren't getting on at first, and after their help session last year, they're getting on regularly. And so we know that the more kids are in school and the more they're learning, the better. And so the more we can do to support parents through this tough time, the better off our students will be.
Haley, that just led right into the last part, which you already did the segue, which is after we've acknowledged our shared experience and after we've asked parents those important questions, starting again with inquiry and not making assumptions, is to act. And we know that one of the worst things we can do in building relationships is to get people all fired up. Like, oh my gosh, they've been so kind up to this point. And then we just kind of let things fizzle out, or we forget to follow up and follow through. So the third A is to act. This means we want to start again with purpose, not just let things kind of roll out randomly or just kind of play like they did the status quo. We really want to take this opportunity to make whatever this new normal, and I don't love that term, but whatever this new normal is, that we make it something beautiful and intentional and purposeful and powerful for our students. So how do we want to act? What's one of the things we want to do in follow-up? And Kaylee talked about this, and that is communicate. There's so many different ways to do that, even though you may not be able to do it face to face, but she named some examples, like with Nearpod and Teams, and she was saying some things that I don't know if you all use it, or Canvas or whatever the platforms are. Follow through by communicating with families in a regular way, not just communicating when something's going wrong, obviously, but what are the things that are going right in our classroom? Communicating if things are changing, because right now things are kind of unpredictable, one would say, and there are still a lot of questions and unknowns, but the extent to which we can communicate, cultivate, which is the next one, that ongoing relationship with our families, those things that we started in relationship building, cultivate that and grow that throughout the school year. Some of these pictures I have to laugh because, you know, nobody's wearing a mask and they're all up on each other. You see in this picture. Hoping that we'll get back to this one day, but in the meantime, how can we re-envision ways to connect to people when you can't necessarily physically touch them? And finally, I can't emphasize enough, especially in tough times such as these that we're living through, to be intentional and purposeful about celebrating the good. Hey, let's say our class set goals. When students start to meet those goals, that's one of the things you want to communicate to families in a celebratory way. We want to celebrate learning. We want to celebrate relationships that are growing, and we want to celebrate gifts that are just manifesting themselves through kids, things, interesting talents that we didn't know that are showcasing themselves in our class. We want to celebrate those things about our classes and our schools with families, and that is one way to reconnect. And I'm whipping through here because I'm keeping an eye on the time, but Kaylee is going to quickly talk to you about some of these ways to celebrate and really make that connection with our parents something positive.
Yeah, so, a little bit about communication, because I think that that's so important, and just making it easy. It kind of ties into the accessibility that I was talking about earlier, but communicating in like a predictable way. If you're going to send home a newsletter and it's going to go home on Friday, please follow through with what you say and send it home even every Friday. Even if you think only one parent is reading it, you never know who in 3 weeks is going to be like, hey, I looked for that newsletter on Friday and I didn't see one. And you're like, oops, I stopped sending them because I thought no one was reading them. Or communicate that you're not going to do that anymore. And saying what you mean and meaning what you say really builds that. It makes you more trustworthy for parents, because you have a lot going on and so do they. And so the more clear you can be, the better. Making sure that it's easy to read and digest. I have to get on my principal all the time, and I hope she's not on this webinar. No, I'm just kidding. She wouldn't mind me saying I have to, like, that was too long, no one's going to read that. And she gets so mad at me, but it's true. And I think you guys can relate as educators that, when someone sends out this big, long paragraph style email, you're like, I'll get to that later when I can. And sometimes you never go back. So using bullet points, I try to push myself to do all of my communication with parents from my cell phone. Like, even if I'm sending an email, I still write it on my cell phone, because if I have enough energy to type it all out, they'll probably have enough energy to read it. And it'll also be able to see what it looks like on a phone, because that's where a lot of our parents are checking their emails. If it's super long, sometimes 5 sentences looks really short in an email, but 5 sentences looks very long in a text message. And so you want to be monitoring and making sure it's easy to read and digest for someone that has a very quick, quick lifestyle where they just need the information and they need it quick. And then making it relevant. I know it's nice to be standards based and all of the things and give the parents all the information, but we also want to make sure it's relevant to the here and now. If we want to teach them how to compare characters, let's just give them the resources on how to compare characters. They don't need to know which standard it is, and things like that. Or you can put it in a different document where they can reference if they want or need. And so just thinking about your parents and what would be relevant to them, and making sure that you're giving that to them so that they don't stop reading your newsletters and they don't stop looking for the emails from you, but making sure that they're, they are easy to read, digest, and that they're relevant to what you're doing. And a couple people I think had asked for links to like the screencast, so I'm going to send them to Amanda and she can put them in the chat.
Awesome. Thank you, Kaylee. So we want to, at this time, give you space to think about and share some of the ways that you want to be intentional in reconnecting with families. And we really want to frame it around these 3 A's, reconnecting by acknowledging. So thinking about what are some of the ways that you want to acknowledge shared experience? What are some ways you want to acknowledge some lessons learned? For example, how do you want to acknowledge just what you're going to do moving forward with families? So one, we're going to ask you to type in the question box, what's one way you want to be intentional in reconnecting with families through acknowledging those shared experiences and just being transparent about what's happened and what's going to happen, the new normal. Secondly, you might want to share one way you want to be intentional in reconnecting with families through asking. So what have you learned about not making assumptions, for example, with families, or about parents and families? And you really want to be intentional about asking them, how are they doing? What do you want me to know? And what's a way that you can help me help your child? What do you need to help your child? And finally, what's one way you want to be intentional in reconnecting with families through action by putting something into practice? Because again, the acknowledgement and the social emotional connection with families and asking them and building that trust and then not following through, all of it will fall flat. So what's your action plan to really follow through for the rest of this school year? Not just connecting at the beginning, but letting that thread of a new beginning and a new connection follow through throughout the school year. So using the question box, what's one way, and it can be something similar to what Kaylee shared or another idea, but what's one way you want to be intentional in reconnecting with your families in this
We're getting a
COVID?
lot of great ideas in
Thanks,
the question
Amanda.
box. They appreciate the idea of the virtual home visits. They talked about setting up a parent group, a virtual parent group. They talk about starting early with communication, inviting them by email, Facebook, texting, virtual visits, blogs, sharing updates in different locations, calls, coffee talk, ask in Google Forms, virtual visits, acknowledge in weekly updates, group texting, consistent and intentional communication, rethinking open house and back to school night with all my students in mind, checking in every week. Remember that facial expressions are now covered by masks. Very important. Help sessions sound amazing. A parent needs survey. I would like to do a monthly coffee with the counselor chat. Messaging families each week. YouTube town hall meetings. Create a calendar. Oh, so many great ideas. I'm inspired by all these ideas.
Yeah. And Amanda, just before we wrap up, one of the things that I would say is, I hope that this will be available, but to just kind of chunk those ideas under big headings or categories. So some of it, one of the categories, for example, might be getting input, or learning about families. Another big topic might be providing information. You might not use the same venue when you want to disseminate information that you want to use when you're trying to glean information, right? So maybe categorizing those. If you have a really awesome team at your school that you work with, like I was blessed to when I was school-based, there might be people with different strengths on your team who might take the lead on those different types of communications and outreach methods. And it can be so exciting that it can spread beyond even your classroom and your team to become something that your school takes on. Like we looked at those 4 different kinds of schools, and one of your ideas might be, how are we going to shift or transform ourselves from maybe a come if you call school to really being a true partnership school? So taking all of the things that we've kind of talked about this afternoon, kind of grouping them and making that action plan so that it feels more manageable and not so overwhelming. Because I know it's exciting when you're on a webinar, and as soon as you get off, it's like, wait, what did they say? Because a life happens, and you're teaching and you're managing schools, and whatever role you're in, it can feel more manageable if you take all of these ideas and find a way to just kind of organize them and chunk them and kind of map it out. I think that's the way Kaylee and I work. That's why we get along well. We're very we like organizing things and mapping stuff out. But Kaylee, anything to add before we?
No, I don't know. I think just, I know it's very overwhelming. I've been supporting a lot of teachers this week, and I've been trying to practice what I preach to support the teachers so that they can support the students. And I think, we've got this. We make the impossible happen every time they ask us to. And so as educators, you guys are going to be great, but definitely slow down, go slow to go fast, and really build that time and take that time to build those relationships with families. It sounds like from the chats that Amanda's been reading out, you guys have great ideas, and hopefully you're re-energized about parent engagement, and you're going to be creative so that we can have a great year.
Thanks, Kaylee. So going back to our objectives, one of the things that we wanted to do is affirm you in your current practice, and we certainly hope that we've shared something that made you say, aha, I do that and I can relate to that. Secondly, we were hoping that we would share something that maybe you hadn't thought about before, something that was new learning, and we hope that there's something that you heard, you're like, hey, that's a pretty cool idea. And finally, we wanted to share something that would inspire you so you want to go back and put it into practice. And judging by what's in the question box, I think, in the chat box, I think we were able to do that. So at this point, are there questions?
Yes, thank you so much for inspiring us all with your ideas and content today. We do have a few questions that have popped up, and if you have a few questions for us, you can go ahead and pop them in the question box, or if we don't have time to get them today, you see their contact information on the screen. One question came up about communication with high school parents. I don't know if either of you have any tips on communication with high school parents.
We're both elementary background, but if the person can put, if there's like a specific issue, or is it just communication in general, I want to be able to try to
They can reach out to you with their specific question. They see your contact information here, and says they're going to be emailing you about their questions. Another question came up. Someone works in the immigrant community, and parents are often reluctant to reach out for communication or support. So they wanted some tips that you may have for dealing with a particular immigrant community.
I'm talking too much, but that home visit idea, one of the things that we did when schools closed, and it reminds me of this, there were people who were afraid because we were just disseminating laptops, giving them out, and there were people who were afraid to come get it, right? But if you have in your district, as we do, a great team of social workers and people like that, and it all is going back to relationships of trust that were established or could be established, where even if it's one person that those families trust and feel like are not going to turn them in, or whatever it is that's making them feel uncomfortable, leverage those people or those teams or those resources in your school district. And who knows, maybe it's even you that has that relationship of trust. But finding out what is at the root of the fear, I think, is it deportation? What is at the root of the fear? And then finding a way to connect with that family that takes that barrier or that threat off the table, so that they will be less reluctant to reach out and receive. But Kaylee, I was thinking about the home visits. What if anything, would you add to
Well,
that?
yeah, and I was gonna say, that personal touch with families that are kind of reluctant, making them kind of see the people at school as human, because a lot of times, no matter your race, no matter your social status, if you're we say like an ambassador of the school, if you're a school board employee, you're part of the system. And so we have to figure out how families can see us as people, because at the end of the day, we're people who really care about these students and want them to be successful. And so we have to help them see us as people. So sending those happy birthday texts or following up with what was told and building that trust slowly but surely and having them see you as a person will help to build that relationship, because they might be fearful of deportation, or they might just be fearful because they don't want to look stupid because they don't understand the language. And so I'm constantly apologizing. We have a growing ESOL population at our school, and so I downloaded a translation app, and I'm always like, I'm so sorry, and I try my best, and they're so thankful that I'm trying. And then I can call, we have an ESOL assistant on campus who can translate for us. But in the meantime, if I know I have a family that speaks a different language, I try really hard. I'm awful at learning other languages, but I try, and they see that effort. And I think that effort will take you a long way. So if you want to do a home visit with a family that you don't share the language with, bring a translator, or the students can be there to help translate. And then you can also use the app. And I would just push you to not categorize those parents as well, and try all the things that are good practices that you've been doing, and keep trying, because every time you try, it might get a little bit, that relationship's going to grow a little bit more.
Kaylee was saying about them seeing us as human. I think it's equally important that we let them know we see them as human as well, and that we have compassion, that we do feel for them and want to help and want to reach out. But I want to just go back to that high school person, because that question is, I don't want to feel like.
And to clarify the high school, we have gotten a few more about high school, and I think it's about having 150 students. How do you connect with so many families? And one was asking about just connecting with the homeroom, so I think it's just having many students. How do you connect with the parents?
Okay, so again, there's an exemplar that we have. I think I'm just blessed the school district I'm in, but we have a principal who is amazing at communicating. He's a high school principal, amazing with communication, and his relationships with parents is one of the best I think I have ever seen for a high school. And as simple as it is, it's just a consistent weekly, I even get it, it's just a consistent weekly blast of things that are important to those high school parents. Things about graduation, proms coming up, exams are coming. This is what the schedule is going to be this week. It's a block schedule. So this week it's your A and your B schedule. Just whatever is relevant for that week, but the consistency of it is what I think won the parents over, to where they saw it every Sunday night. We're going to be seeing that. And it's not, as Kaylee said, this big, long Bible of a thing. This is what's going on this week. This is what's relevant. And I mean, I would say start with that. Just something consistent, that's relevant, and that's specific to what's important to the kids in the school at that time, in your class for just that week, and just do it consistently.
Also, with having so many students, parent-teacher home visit project actually started, I believe, in a middle or a high school. And so word travels fast. When you start to build those strong relationships with some, you still get that reputation of someone that cares and is working to build relationships. So I don't think you have to worry about building that strong of a relationship with 150 parents. But the ones that need the help and are reaching out, we kind of like go for the low hanging fruit first and then build from there. But when I go to students' sporting events and things like that, I don't have to go to all the games, and I don't have to go to all the sporting events of the kids in my room. But word travels fast around our campus of, oh, that's the teacher that always comes to the football games. She's so cool, and so they start to talk, and your relationship and your reputation grow with that. And so I would say, like, don't stress yourself out, but do as much as you can. like Mary was saying, that blast, the Remind 101s, just, you know, being consistent with those and putting them out there, and that just that little touch will take you a long way.
Well, thank you so much for this inspirational talk today. I just want to make sure, Callie, this is your Twitter feed and Facebook feed. This is how folks find you. They were asking. They want to make sure this is correct.
Kaylee?
Yeah.
Oh.
Yes, I started where I didn't want to tweet anything, so I was undercover tweeter, and then I didn't want Instagram, but I got, so I believe those are correct. I think I had to look them up when I sent them, but I also just put my email in the chat.
Okay, I'll send that out. All right. Well, thank you all so much. If you want to go to the next slide, I just want to thank all of you for taking time out of your busy schedules today to learn more about parent engagement and this important topic in these challenging times. And we also do have more information on our free Sanford Inspire website, where you can see the professional development that is focused on family engagement. So we encourage you to sign up for your free account today and take advantage of these 30-minute modules that give you additional tips. Any closing words, Mary or Kaylee, from this experience today that you want to share with our audience?
This is Mary. Just that I'm inspired myself by the fact that this is the beginning of school, and it's a busy and crazy time under what I would say normal conditions, that people took time today, especially under the circumstances, to engage in this conversation and to want to learn more. I mean, we were here to try to provide something inspiring, but I myself am inspired. And so I just want to thank everybody for tuning in and for hanging in. And my thoughts are with us for a school year that's more amazing than what we might think right now, that we're gonna do great things for our students and our families. Just thank you.
Ditto.
Thank you.
I'm good. I
Thank you
a lot.
Oh, yes.
Thank you.
We appreciate your words of wisdom. Yeah, we appreciate your words of wisdom, and know that this webinar will be sent out and the deck will be sent out, so you can go back and watch it and hear these ideas that were shared today, because we definitely need these reminders. With that, we invite you to our next webinar on September 23rd, Engaging in SEL Through the Visual Arts, presented by award-winning art teacher Jonathan Jurovich. You can register today for this exciting webinar on our website today. Once this webinar comes to a close, a survey will launch on your screen. It's very short, and we would greatly appreciate your feedback. We do read your feedback, and we take your responses seriously. To this day, your responses have helped us build more successful webinars. Thank you all for joining today, and stay safe.